The patch I'm going to talk about today is probably one of the most famous patches concerning the ARP 2600. It's from Edgar Winter's Frankenstein. I've placed a link to a YouTube video showing Edgar's synth effect solo. Yeah, I've placed this link in the description, down in the description. But even if being very famous, the patch itself is quite simple actually. It's entirely based on the self-resonant low-pass filter. The picture shows its beginning, which is, sound-wise, silence. We use only the sine wave output of the VCO2 in this patch. The VCO itself is tuned to the highest possible frequency. From the VCO2, the signal goes to the VCF with resonance turned up to 100%, the resonance of the VCF. The function of the VCO2 signal will be a matter a little bit later in this video. From the VCF, the signal goes to from the VCF, the signal goes to the VCA, of course, to the amplifier, and from the amplifier, the VCA, to the mixer, where it bumps into a wall. Bomb. Well, it meets the closed down VCA slider there, which stops the audio from entering the mixer, and by that from being audible at all. Silence, as I said. Let me open the VCA's mixer slider for a moment to demonstrate the influence of the tuning of the VCO2. With lower tunings, the resonant spectrum contains more bass frequencies, well, not really a surprise, and the overall character of the changings in the sound while sliding the low-pass filter's cut-off frequencies is different with different VCO tunings as well. Once again, I'll return to the matter of the VCO2 a little bit later. But we know from video 1 of this series, or from reading the manual, that the VCA needs an envelope it can follow, at least as long as I don't patch any cables to keep the VCA open at all of the time. For example, by patching the VCO's output, let me use the sine wave output, directly into one of the VCA's inputs. And the envelopes need a trigger impulse, for example, from hitting a key on the keyboard to start doing their work. So, where does this trigger comes from in this patch when I don't hit any key? Well, it's this little tiny switch below the attack release label and next to the keyboard gate trigger label. I've secretly switched it from down position to up position to demonstrate the goings-on. In up position, the envelopes will wait for a keystroke on the keyboard, but in down position, that's the original position in the patch Frankenstein, the envelopes start doing their work at each trigger impulse which arrives at the input jack below the switch. For example, from a square wave, which comes from an oscillator. Here I use oscillator 1 in LFO mode. And if there isn't anything patched to this jack, well, then the internal pre-wired structure does its work, and internally it's the clock generator of the sample and hold unit, the clock generator of this unit, which is pre-wired to this input jack. So, the clock of the sample and hold unit triggers the envelopes, which open the VCA according to the adjusted envelope settings. There are two envelope generators, the ADSR above and the AR below. With the corresponding sliders in the VCA section, I adjust the relative influence of each of these two envelope generators on the opening-closing behavior of the VCA. Let me mess around a bit and change the influence of the two envelopes as well as their shape. But the ADSR envelope modulates not only the VCA, but also the VCF in this patch, even if not completely at the beginning of Edgar Winter's performance. The change is done using the performance and using the ADSR slider in the VCF section. But let's talk about the rightmost slider in the VCF section. Its input jack is pre-wired to the sine output of the VCO2, and it modulates the cutoff frequency of the filter. Let me show this. I switch the sample and hold clock trigger off, bridge the envelope section to be independent from any trigger or gate signal, and I turn the resonance of the filter down to 0. The sound vanishes, the filter doesn't resonate, doesn't produce sound of its own, and only the slider in question is turned up. It proves that we don't have an audio input here, but a modulation input. Without anything to modulate right now, the cutoff frequency of the filter is turned up and down according to the frequency of VCO2. But as there isn't any audio fed into the filter, nor does the filter self-resonate, we don't hear anything. Well, let me fade the square wave from oscillator 1 in now. And reducing the VCO's frequency to LFO rates. And as we see and hear, VCO2 modulates the cutoff frequency of the filter. That's all. That's the only influence on the sound, on the whole sound, that VCO2 has in this patch. All right then. So, what does Edgar Winter do at the point of his performance, which I have put a link down in the description too? First, he rises the VCA slider in the mixer section, of course. Nothing happens so far. Then he decreases the filter's frequency down to about 100 Hz. The resonant filter gives sound, and the clock of the sampler and hold unit makes a rhythm from it. Then he lowers the influence of VCO2 to 0. Now we hear the unmodulated resonant filter. At last he rises the ADSR slider quickly up and down, synchronizing his manual actions to what the drummer of the band is performing, emphasizing the drummer's rhythmical patterns that way. Go and watch the video, as I said, link below in the description. What you hear, well, what you hear there doesn't sound exactly the same. Why not? Well, with some fine-tuning of the filter frequency, the ADSR and the clock adjustments, we could get quite near to what we hear in the performance, but never to 100%. Oh, if I only had an original ARP 2600 to reproduce the sound to 100%, you may be thinking now, well, you wouldn't be able to do so. There were no two completely identically sounding machines in the analog world. And as Arturia hardly built their software after exactly Edgar Winter's ARP 2600, which he is using in the performance, oh, well, I think you've got it. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and put the bell on, and perhaps even to donate a bit. The donation link is in the description as well. Thank you. Enjoy your day. Golf.